Hello Matthias, this is Mashnu and I've been looking at your game this morning, analyzing it, and I must say that I find that you played a good game. You write in your message that your rating at this moment is 1300, and I find that the level of your play in this game is higher than that. So that promises some improvement of your rating in the future. I'm sure that you are going to rise this rating. You write me that you play only 6 months in a chess club now, so this is a good level for someone who is actually just starting. So let's have a look at the game, because of course this mistake that you made in the end game is was not necessary at all, of course, but in the rest of the game also there are some points where there is some improvement possible. So I want to have a good critical look at this game. Knight f6, knight f3, d6, bishop to f4, g6. So you play a kind of King's Indian setup, and he plays e3 here. This is the so-called London system or Torre system with that white plays. It's a very solid system for white, and this bishop out of the pawn chain has an advantage and also a disadvantage. The advantage is of course that it's not being blocked by its own pawns, it's not being locked in there, so it's already active looking at the center square. Now the disadvantage about this bishop to f4 followed by e3 is that there is a possible weakness on b2. The bishop is no longer defending b2, so later this can start playing a role. You play bishop to g7 here. He plays h3, a move that we see often in this kind of setups by white. The idea is to have a hiding place for the bishop. So in case you play knight h5, he can hide on h2. Castle, and now here he plays bishop to e2, and I find that this is actually not a good move by white, because we see bishop e2 in this type of positions only when there is a threat of playing bishop to g4 by black, pinning this knight on f3. But right now he already played h3, so he's controlling g4, so there is absolutely no need to place the bishop on e2. Instead of that, a much more active way of playing would have been by your opponent to play this bishop to c4. That's a much more active position. But well, he played passively bishop to e2. Now in this position already we see what could happen with this weakness on b2. When you see this, when you meet this kind of positions where you have this so-called dragon bishop, we call it the dragon bishop because it's similar to the Sicilian dragon defense. We have a bishop on g7, and the idea is to use this long diagonal here. That means that because of this weakness on b2, we need to open this diagonal. So right here, instead of what you played knight b2 d7, you could have already done c5 with the idea of opening this diagonal. Now notice that if he takes on c5, now knight to h5 is very strong, attacking the bishop and attacking b2. So you already have advantage here. Of course, he doesn't need to take on c5. A much better move for white here is to simply play c3, trying to close this diagonal, and well, the counterpart of this is that the c3 square is taking away for this knight on b1, but normally this knight, we see it often that it goes to d2 anyway, so c3 would be a good reaction here. Now the position here is equal. It's not like I'm saying that with c5 you get advantage with black immediately. No, but it is strategically seen, it is a good decision to try to open this diagonal and to attack the white center. So that's why I like this c5 move in this type of positions. Now let's go back to the game. After bishop to e2, you played knight b to d7. Here he castled, and now you continued with rook to e8. Of course c5 is still possible, but rook to e8 played. Now with these last two moves, knight to d7 and rook to e8, you show that this is your plan. You want to play e7, e5, and that is of course a good decision, since you need to attack white's center. He plays c4 here, and now you play knight to h5, and I'm not sure about this move. It's not a wrong move, but I wonder if placing this knight on e4 would be better. I mean, by going to h5 you do attack this bishop on f4, but he can go to h2 and then there is nothing going on. Like in the game bishop to h2, if we look at this position, his bishop is still active, and your knight has gone to the rim, to the side of the board where it has less activity. So, well, perhaps if you would combine this move with c5 now, that would be interesting, because now we have this bishop looking at b2. I was wondering if knight to e4 would be an improvement, perhaps. I'm not sure. The idea is that after, for example, queen to c2, perhaps we can play f5, supporting this knight. On the other hand, this open this white diagonal here, light square diagonal, so it's not very clear. Another idea would be to play the other bishop to f6 to support this centralized knight on the the other knight to f6 to support the centralized knight on e4. Centralization is a concept that was explained by Aaron Nimzowitsch in his book My System, and it means that our pieces in the center have much more influence than on the side of the board, especially knights, but also in some position bishops, rooks, anything. So that would be the idea of this knight to e4 and then supporting it. Let's go back to the game. It's good to think about these possibilities, even if you calculate and you don't see exactly a big advantage or something like that, but consider how to improve the activity of your pieces. That's actually the advice. Let's go to the game again. Bishop to h4. Here instead of c5 you played e5, and your opponent took on e5. You take back with the pawn, and he plays knight to c3. So now, because of this c4 and knight c3, he has control over these two central squares, and it is important not to give him more influence in the center. I don't agree with your next move, e4, because by doing this you give away control over the square d4. Now your opponent didn't make use of this. He played knight to d2, but just have a look at this variation. If he plays knight to d4, now this knight cannot be chased away by c5. I mean, okay, it can be, but then we lose control over d5, so later this knight will go to d5 and we don't have c7, c6 anymore. So here, if we play knight h to f6, then white has a very strong move, is knight to b5, attacking c7. That's the weakest point in black's position. So this is why I found it actually too risky to advance this pawn e5 to e4. Better than this would be, I think, to play c6 here. c6 to control d5. So now with the pawns we are controlling d5 and we are controlling d4. So we have influence in the center. Let's continue with the game now, because after knight c3 you played e4, and fortunately he went with his knight to d2, attacking your knight on attacking your pawn on on e4. Knight to f6, going back. Now he plays b4. Actually he opens now this long diagonal, you see. So here, when something like this happens, we immediately must think, okay, what can I do with this knight? Is there anything that I can play so I can make use of this diagonal? So we could look at, for example, moves like knight to g4. If knight to g4, if he takes the knight, we take on c3. The rook goes to b1 to defend b4. It's an option. Let's say we have doubled a pawn on the king side of white. We have taken this knight on c3, so he doesn't have the threat of going to d5 anymore, and his other knight is not very active yet. So this kind of variations are things that we have to look at when something like this happens. In the game you played a5, and that's also a very logical reaction to try to undermine these two pawns there. He took on a5, and now you played knight to c5. This is a strong maneuver, I find, that you did, actually playing a5 to persuade him to take, so you can get influence now, activate this knight by bringing it to c5. That's a strong square for the knight. Of course he plays now knight to b3. At first sight, perhaps wanting to trade this knight. On the other hand, this knight can go to d4. Knight to f7 played to defend your own knight, and you are attacking now the knight on c3. He blocks the diagonal by playing knight to d4, centralizing his knight, and now you take the pawn on a5. As a result of this, we have now two weaknesses in the opponent's camp. So these are the two pawns that could be targets of attack later in the game. I find that here with black you have a good position. You have activated your pieces. Only this one is something to take care of, but the weaknesses in white's camp are clear, so that gives us possibilities. Now here white played knight to d5, and here we see this attack on c7. The bishop on h2 is becoming active, and we need to close this diagonal, of course, by playing either knight to e5 or bishop to e5. Both moves are possible, and you choose to play your bishop to e5. Now he plays queen to d2. You take the bishop on h2 with check, and he takes back. This means that, well, on one hand our dark squares here are becoming a bit weak, but it's not easy for white to make use of this, because his queen is far away from entering here, and without a dark square bishop of white it's also difficult to make use of this. Well, right now, after this check and retaking, the rook on a5 is attacked. So you play c6, defending the rook and attacking the knight. The knight goes to b4. Now you play knight to e5. Nice squares for the knights here, with the idea of perhaps later going to d3, where the knight would be very strong. He plays king to h1, and now you go with a knight to e6. Well, of course it's good to trade this knight, but there was another idea here that I was looking at. You see, the bishop now on h2 is gone, so we can also say that the dark squares here are a bit weak. The pawn is advanced to h3, and we have a bishop here. So I was thinking, what if we have a plan of going with a queen to h4, with the idea of sacrificing on h3. Now, of course, we cannot do it immediately, because after queen to h4 now, for example, knight takes c6 is possible, because the queen then attacks this rook. So we could play here rook to a8, The idea is simply to prepare queen to h4. Let's say white brings his rook from a1 to d1 to have the rooks on this open file. Now queen to h4, and we are threatening already to take on h3. If you place, let's say, king to g1, then bishop takes h3 is already strong. After g takes h3, we can play queen takes, and then we threaten to enter with the knight on f3. These are, let's say, hidden possibilities in the position of starting an attack. Now, I can imagine that in this position you are thinking strategically, positionally, and you think, okay, this is a very strong knight, the white knight on d4, so I need to trade it. So in that sense, it's a very logical idea what you have of playing knight to e6. Actually, in every position that we meet in a game, it's good to have a look at what are the weaknesses of the opponent and can I make use of them. Now, this weakened pawn structure in white's king's defense can bring us to the idea of playing this rook a8 and knight queen h4 with this attack on h3. But let's continue with the game now, because you still have a good position here. Knight to b3 played. You trade queens, and that's a good decision, since the endgame will be better for you, because he has two very weak pawns on a2 and on c4. So in that sense, trading queens is interesting. Knight to c5 again. Knight to b3. Now you trade here on b3. Okay, so we have now a symmetrical pawn structure. The pawns of white are not longer isolated. Let's have a look what would be an alternative to taking on b3. I don't see really something very clear here to do instead of taking on b3. So, because of this double attack, attacking your rook and attacking your knight, so you're more or less forced to take on b3. Could we go back one move? Do we have anything better here? How about a rook to a4, for example? Rook to a4, attacking the knight, and also attacking a bit more this pawn. If it defends the knight, now we don't have any longer this rook on a4, a5, so we can play now knight to c5. If knight to b3, well, no, that's not possible, because this knight is undefended. Or he takes then on c5. Oh, let's have a good look here. If you now take on b3, he cannot take with the pawn, because then the knight falls, so he's forced to take with the rook then to keep his knight defended. So here we get a similar exchange, with the difference that now his pawns are still weak, are isolated. So here bishop to e6 is already possible to attack this pawn on c4. This would have been an improvement, I think. Well, as you can see, I'm looking really in a level of details, because your main strategies are good, but these are just those details that can be improved and that are often hidden in a position. Knight to c5. Let's go on with the game, trading here, and now you trade the rook. So now he possesses now the open a file, and you play a rook to d8 to make use of this other open file. Rook to a8 looks a bit annoying, since he's spinning your bishop now. And now you have the plan of going with your knight, with your king to f8, e8, d7 and c7. I think it would be easier to play knight to simply king to g7 here, to get the king out of this back rank. And of course this is a bit annoying, this spin, Perhaps we could solve it by playing rook to e8 and then bishop to d7, something like that. It's not very easy to say. Let's have a look at what happened in the game. King to f8, king g1, king e7. Now he plays c5. c5 I don't think is a good idea, because he is actually isolating his pawns again, more or less. The pawn on c5 can become weak. Your bishop can later go into e6 to attack b3. Actually right now bishop e6 would be strong. You played king to d7 here, so you had this plan in your head of walking with your king to the other side of the board. And here actually every time that your opponent makes a move, like for example here this c5, we must think, okay, what are the consequences of this move? And in this case we can say this becomes a possible target, and also this becomes a strong square. If he had a knight on c4 he could go to d6. Those are the general consequences of a move like this. But here already bishop to e6 attacking the pawn on b3 is strong, I think. Now after bishop to e6 our pawn on b7 is undefended, so he could attack it with rook to a7, but then we play rook to d7 defending it. Now what can he do to save this this pawn on b3? It's not very easy. f4, attacking your knight. You can take en passant here, and after g takes, bishop takes b3. Can he play here bishop to d1 to defend it? This bishop doesn't look good there. Oh no, of course not. The rook is on d7, so you simply take, so this is simply impossible. So that means that here you have advantage by playing with the idea of attacking his weakest point. King to d7 played in the game. The position is still equal now. Knight to c2, king to c7, knight to d4, and now b6 is perhaps the start of the mistake. After this check, bishop b7, the bishop is pinned. Bishop a6 attacks your pinned bishop. Rook to b8 is the only move. Now he plays b4, and here comes your big mistake, b5. With b5 you give away this square a5, and one move later it becomes even worse, because you play knight to d3 instead of knight to c4. That was actually necessary here. Then still white has a good position, by the way, because he is the one, let's say, ruling here. You cannot move your bishop, you cannot move your rook, and you cannot move your king away, so you're kind of tied up here, and that would give white the possibility of well, it's not easy to find a winning plan for white as well. Perhaps going with his king to f1 to e2, then playing f3. It's not really very clear, but anyway black doesn't have any possible active play here. So with black the only thing you can do is wait and see if you can do something with this knight, but it's difficult for black here, this position. Now in the game knight to d3 is losing, and it's a strange, what you write in your email is that you saw knight to a5 and somehow you played immediately knight to d3. Perhaps a way of that kind of impulsive reaction to threaten something, threaten to take on b4. Well, it's very difficult to always it's very difficult to explain how blunders happen, but believe me, everyone blunders. Even grandmasters blunder sometimes. there are examples of grandmasters giving a queen away or overlooking, checkmating one move. So now and then this always happens, and well, in this case, of course, is frustrating to lose in such a way, since the game was so good for you. You played very well, very consistent, and then it's of course sad to lose this way. But forget the result. If we look at the way you played it, I find that your level is already higher than 1300. So, well, I hope you found this commentary interesting and instructive. I'm going to send you a web link with this video, so you can watch it as many times as you like, and you can go now to my website to donate something, and well, after that, of course, you are welcome to send more games in the future if you find this interesting and a good way to improve your chess. Okay, Matthias, I hope you keep enjoying chess and keep playing and keep improving. Best wishes and goodbye.